Julian is a medical genius, and he is also a patient with depression. I became a doctor to save him. He killed himself for his first love. Returned to 18, I began to distance myself from him. But he was displeased. I asked him, you know I've liked you since we were kids, right? He evaded the issue, but I can't live without you. Can't we just stay good friends? I laughed. Julian, you don't deserve it. When Julian was 32, he won a world-class medical award. That night he went to receive it. I tidied up the hotel and waited for him to come back and celebrate. Instead, I only received the news of his suicide. The room was dim. Amid the scent of freshly cut roses I vomited until I nearly passed out, my whole body soaked with cold sweat, as if I had just been dragged out of water. Endless self-reproach became a vast net, and the suffocating weight trapped me. 2 years earlier, after countless failed experiments, Julian's emotions had collapsed again. He replayed everything in a dark room, talking to himself. In the end he rushed into the kitchen with a paring knife, crying, "Give it back to me," while saying he would kill the other. He seemed to be confronting someone, but the blade's point was aimed at himself. I saw him with the knife through the monitor and immediately climbed from the balcony into his apartment. But I was still a step too late. The blade had already sunk into flesh and blood. Julian! Don't move. He was wearing gray loungewear, his hair a little long, obscuring some of his features. His silhouette was gaunt, his face carrying a sickly fragility. When he turned and saw me, he looked completely bewildered and helpless. I walked slowly up to him, took his hand, and made him loosen his grip, telling him not to touch the fruit knife at his waist. Whether it went in a little deeper or was pulled out, the situation would only get worse. After he calmed down, he apologized to me. "I'm sorry." "It's okay." I covered the area around his wound with a towel, looked up and forced a smile as I asked him, "Did you forget to take your medicine again?" "I didn't mean to." He reached out and wiped the tear from the corner of my eye, his gaze dark and fixed on me. "Is it very hard for you?" "It's not hard. I was just terrified of losing him." I took his long fingers in my hand and pressed them against my cheek, begging him, "Julian, please don't die." "I'm begging you, okay?" He didn't answer me, he just told me not to cry. Perhaps from that moment, a faint answer began to settle in my heart. In the end, I couldn't hold on to him. Although Julian suffered from depression and was sullen, aloof, and hard to talk to, his professional skills were exceptional. He was the leader of the whole team. It was because of him that I initially chose the biology department in college. Later, I really fell in love with the subject. The sense of achievement after overcoming one challenge after another gave me the drive to keep going. But Julian seemed to harbor an almost pathological obsession with conquering this disease. He spent 5 years, and he really did it. On the day the Phase 3 clinical trial succeeded, he showed a real smile. In his bloodshot eyes was a moist euphoria. He pulled me into a tight hug. "Mia, I won." In that moment, I still thought I could truly have him. Not long after, Julian received a call, the organizers of the Overseas Medical Prize informing him he had won. Before boarding the plane, he was unusually agitated, muttering that there wasn't much time left, that it would be too late. I thought he was having another episode, so I hurried him to take his medication and kept consoling him, "Julian, there's still time. The experiment already succeeded, we'll have plenty of time to prove it." He gradually calmed, and the slight lift of his brows unintentionally revealed a bit of cutting sharpness. "Is there really time?" I told him firmly, "There is." Only when I glimpsed his secret did I realize how ridiculous I had been. I returned to the country alone carrying his ashes. I went back to Julian's place and sorted through his belongings. The white shirt on the couch still seemed to hold his scent. I put the dry-cleaned coat into the wardrobe. The table was littered with his handwritten drafts, stacks of materials, laboratory equipment. I organized it all bit by bit. Until I saw a name written on the back of one of his draft pages, Clara. Densely written, the ink bleeding through the paper. I lost my mind. I smashed open Julian's locked drawer. I found the secret he'd hidden his whole life. From the group photo of his high school graduation, he had carefully cut Clara out into a neat square. There was also a cassette tape in the drawer, recording the thoughts he'd been nursing since he was 18. So in the midst of his grand youth, he had once harbored such a humble, secret love for someone. He chose biology only because Clara had some kind of hereditary disease. Over the years he threw himself into research, trying to conquer that illness. I thought it sprang from the stubbornness of a genius. But it was all to save her. When he said too late, it was because Clara had been rushed into the emergency room again. He would stand outside her ward in the dead of night, secretly praying to whatever gods there were not to take her. He would stay in frequent contact with her attending physician, discussing her condition. He loved her for many, many years without her knowing. And the date Clara died was the very day Julian went abroad to receive an award. They say after collecting the prize he took a phone call, then jumped from a building and killed himself. This was a love-driven suicide. The moment I discovered the truth, I fell apart. Julian's mad love for Clara had turned me into a complete fool. How could he do this to me? I hate myself for not discovering the secret sooner. I don't know what Julian was thinking as he watched me shed tears for him time and again, living each year in the fear of losing him and losing sleep. If even once he had clearly told me that he didn't like me, that he only saw me as a little sister, I wouldn't have kept living in that false illusion. How much I loved him once, so much do I now hate him. I didn't attend Julian's funeral. I locked myself in my room and cried in silence, from day until night, numbing the throbbing heart with alcohol. It was unbearably painful. I can accept the consequences of my own love, admit I loved the wrong person, and pay the price for it. But I cannot instantly pull myself out of a relationship that lasted more than 10 years. Nor can I forgive his years-long deceit. The pain Julian inflicted on me was no less than if he had killed my soul. Julian killed me twice. Once was his death. Once was his secret. I hated him to death. 3 months later, I had become unable to work from severe depression and was hospitalized for electroconvulsive therapy. During the 12th treatment, I lost consciousness entirely in agonizing pain. I left this world carrying a lifetime of hatred and regret. Unexpectedly, when I opened my eyes again, I was back at 18. I couldn't even tell whether I had entered another world after death or had simply dreamed a long dream. My deskmate Sophie had her arm around my shoulder, her face alight with excitement. "Mia, what birthday present did you get Julian?" I sat in the cocktail bar Julian had booked out, watching my former classmates from senior year, feeling as if ages had passed. It was the winter break of our final year. Before I could say anything, Sophie opened the bag beside me. "Wow, you can tell you knitted this yourself, that silver gray really suits Julian." I looked at the scarf and my eyes stung. When I was sorting through Julian's things, I found this scarf too. He often wore it. He clearly didn't like me, yet he gave me so many illusions of being favored by him. Damn it. The bar's lights suddenly went out, leaving only the stage lights. A boy in a white shirt and black trousers, his back straight, sat at the piano and began to play Secret That Cannot Be Told. It was his beloved piano piece. I once asked Julian, "Why do you like this piece?" He said, "There's no reason, I just like it." Now I understand everything. Clara was the secret he couldn't say aloud. Looking at his familiar yet foreign figure, my heart was as still as water. Love doesn't vanish all at once. Long before I discovered his secret, long before those 12 electric shocks, I had already stopped loving him. My gaze fell on Clara in the crowd. She wore a beige sweater and watched the stage quietly. Her look was tender and lingering. 18-year-old me might not have noticed. But now I understood at a glance. She loved him too. It turned out it was never just Julian's one-sided crush. Their longing was mutual. In my past life, on Julian's 18th birthday he rented out a cozy bar and invited the whole class. Sophie said Julian was secretly passionate and too shy to celebrate alone with me, so he invited everyone. At the time I believed that too. But now I'm awake. I picked up the gift bag and, while no one was watching, slipped away. Just as I reached the doorway, I heard Julian's voice, cold but choked with emotion. He said, "I like you." Amid the classmates' jeering, I clearly heard the name he called out behind him. Clara. I like you, Clara. The next moment, the room fell utterly silent. This had never happened in my previous life. Everyone used to assume Julian and I were childhood sweethearts, inseparable and bound to end up together. Everyone thought he suddenly started studying hard in the second year to get into the same university as me. Everyone thought he liked me. But he never liked me. The person he intended to confess to wasn't me. I couldn't help turning back for a glance. I wanted to see his expression of happiness. I had seen him so many times despairing, had seen his patched-up corpse, but had never seen him truly joyful. Under the lights, Julian's narrow eyes tilted up at the corners, his rims reddened, fixed intently on Clara below the stage. Liking someone can't be hidden, and neither can happiness. In this life, he probably won't have any more regrets, will he? Julian, if this is a daydream, then I'm returning your dream to you. I didn't want to know why Julian suddenly confessed. I no longer cared. At that moment, even my hatred for him had grown faint. I slowly closed the door of the bar and stepped onto the snow, one footstep at a time. It was the cold that did it, my eyes froze. It wasn't that I was grieving. One last time, I would cry one final time. Not for anyone else, but for the brave, sincere self I once was. He doesn't like me, but that doesn't mean I did something wrong, nor does it mean I'm not good enough. I did nothing wrong. I am fine. When I reached the back alley, I didn't hesitate to toss the scarf into the trash can. I don't know how far I walked or where I went. I walked until my legs went weak and finally crouched down at the roadside where no one was around. I didn't notice when snowflakes began to fall. They landed on my skin, cold and bone-piercing. My vision gradually cleared from the blur. I heard faint footsteps, looked up, and saw Alex, tall and lithe in a black padded jacket. He held a black umbrella, shielding me overhead. His gaze was strange, like waking from a beautiful dream, tinged with a bit of regret. Alex, Julian's former psychologist. Before he died in my last life, I asked him, "Did you know Julian has someone he really likes?" He was silent for a long moment and then told me, "I can't disclose a patient's privacy." I remembered how he had once tried to jolt me out of my daydreams, and I had refused. Unlike last life, when he wore gold-rimmed glasses and looked indifferent, this Alex wasn't wearing glasses and still had a boyish air about him. I looked at him puzzled. At this point in time, we shouldn't even know each other. Why was he looking at me like that? Then I thought of every time in my past life I accompanied Julian to the hospital, the way Alex looked at me each time and the things he said to me. I felt ashamed. He already knew. He knew I was a clown in unrequited love, yet never once told me outright. He really is far too professional. I felt stifled, but had no real reason. He was not wrong, and I shouldn't have lost my temper with him. I stood up to leave, but having squatted too long my leg had gone numb and I twisted my ankle. Just as I was about to fall, someone grabbed my arm. I hadn't steadied myself and crashed into the other person's embrace. "Careful." His voice trembled slightly. "You don't need to worry about it. I don't even know you." He said nothing, only placed the umbrella into my hand. "Sorry." An apology at the wrong moment, inexplicable. I watched his retreating back. What a strange person. I straightened out my feelings after being reborn and, following my memories, returned home. The house was very quiet. After my parents divorced and each remarried, I lived alone. My father left the house to my mother and me. After my mother remarried, I didn't want to go back to the past, and besides, I was already an adult and could take care of myself, so I stayed behind on my own. My mother visibly breathed a sigh of relief back then. "It's fine, I was never close to them anyway, so I didn't feel lonely." My parents met through arranged introductions. When they reached the right age they got together. Each had their own career and neither was willing to compromise. They were too busy with work to look after me, so they hired a nanny. The nanny didn't care for me, and when I was little I was absorbed in games, so she ignored me too. The two people who barely had time to attend a parents' meeting suddenly blamed each other for failing to raise me whenever my grades were bad. Then they turned their anger on me. They fired the nanny who looked after me, smashed my computer and game console, took away my allowance, and locked me out on the balcony to reflect. Those days weren't easy for Julian either. His mother had died not long before, and his relationship with his father was tense. He often hid on the balcony listening to a portable tape player filled with the tapes his mother had loved in life. His father wanted a divorce, his mother refused, and one night she drove out to catch him in the act. There was an accident, and she never returned. From then on Julian hated his father, became rebellious, skipped school, got into fights, and his grades plummeted. We were like two abandoned wild children, growing up keeping each other company. When he was punished to stand on the balcony, I passed food to him from mine. When he was hurt in a fight, I climbed the balcony to bring him medicine. The first time he failed at the bottom of the class, I was kept in the dark and helped him compile his wrong answer notebooks. I never imagined he was pretending to be a poor student on purpose. On New Year's Eve, he hid on the balcony smoking alone. I stayed on my own balcony with him. At midnight I would light a sparkler and wish him a happy new year. He called me childish, but he would prepare New Year's money for me. All memories that carry knives. Not worth holding on to. I packed away everything related to Julian. The birthday presents he had given me over the years, the comic books he left in my room. After I put them in a box and went downstairs, I ran into Julian returning home. I didn't look at him. After throwing the things into the trash, Julian followed me. "What did you throw away?" His voice was easy. I couldn't be bothered to answer. He asked me again, "Why did you leave early? Are you upset?" I stepped around him and walked into the stairwell. "Mia, what are you unhappy about? Even if I'm with Clara, we're still friends, aren't we?" I let out a sigh. If in my past life I had discovered his secret before he died, I would surely have screamed and raged at him like a shrew, arguing and making a scene. Thankfully, that wasn't the case. Thankfully, faced with him now, I can be sufficiently dignified. "Julian, I won't be upset no matter who you fall in love with, that's your business, not mine. I'm not interested in being friends with you anymore. You're smart, you can easily take first place, but I can't, and I don't want to waste any more time on you, nor let you affect my studies. So please stay away from me and stop bothering me." I thought I had made myself very clear, but as I turned to leave he gripped my wrist so hard it hurt. I frowned and looked back at him. "Julian, what are you doing right now?" In the dim stairwell his face was shadowed and unclear. "I've been affecting your studies? Why didn't you say that before? Why only today?" "I've wanted to say it for a long time, I just didn't know how to start." "You're lying. Julian, I hope you won't always be so self-centered and will consider other people's feelings. I don't want to be friends with you, that's my right." I deliberately pried his fingers apart one by one and turned to go upstairs. Back at home, I found my phone and dialed a number etched into my memory. "Professor Zhang, sorry to bother you, but there's something very important I need to tell you, please." After that day, Julian and I grew distant. That winter break I was busy reworking my high school material. Sophie said Julian had taken Clara to see a celebrity's concert. Sophie was so angry she said she wanted to make him regret it. I didn't take it seriously. Someone who throws everything into loving another person, how could they possibly regret it? Still, it put me in a bad mood. I shook my head, ended the call with Sophie, and buried myself in my studies again. After winter break we started school. Julian and Clara made no effort to hide their relationship, whether at lunchtime or between classes, the two of them were always clinging to each other. Julian patiently tutored her, fetched hot water and bought meals for her, waited for her after evening study sessions, and walked her home. While classmates watched the show, they couldn't help but look at me with pity. But I didn't care. I switched to the biology department at another university because I didn't want any more entanglements with Julian. One day after class, I was working on the last big problem of a math test when I suddenly felt a shadow pass over my head. When I looked up, I saw Clara, hesitating as if she wanted to speak. She looked at me with a guilty face, then handed me a cup of milk tea and whispered, "I'm sorry. You haven't done anything to wrong me, there's no need to apologize. The milk tea is still warm, take it." "No, thank you." I packed up the papers and rose to leave. She hurried after me from behind, insisting on handing me the milk tea. I pushed it away. She lost her footing, stumbled on the chair as she stepped back. Just as she was about to fall, I reached out to help, but was shoved hard instead. My abdomen struck the table corner, a stabbing pain shooting through me. Julian's voice rose with anger. "Mia, are you out of your mind?" He held Clara tightly. She hurried to explain, "It wasn't Mia, it was my own clumsiness." But Julian wouldn't let it go and turned his fury on me. "Don't you know she can't get hurt? Do you want to kill her? Mia, if you have any grievances, take them out on me, don't touch her." A flash of nameless fury rose in me. Why should it matter to me whether she gets hurt? If you're so afraid she'll be harmed, stay away from me. I'm not part of your play. I don't have time for your Mary Sue melodrama, so stop bothering me. After I finished speaking, I left through the back door. From behind came the faint sound of Julian coaxing in a low voice. "Are you hurt anywhere? Does it hurt? Crazy. Does he really think he's the male lead of a novel, and everyone else is a vicious supporting female?" That night I was doing practice problems at home when a sharp pain in my abdomen kept getting worse. I lifted my shirt and found a bruise. It didn't look too bad. But around midnight I started vomiting and having diarrhea, my stomach cramped and I broke out in a cold sweat. I crawled out of the bathroom, trembling, and dialed emergency services. After I finished speaking, I collapsed onto the floor. I don't know how long passed before I heard someone calling my name. "Mia. Wake up." I opened my eyes to find Julian looking wildly anxious. The balcony door was open. I was about to demand why he had climbed into my home through the balcony when he simply scooped me up in his arms. The paramedics were knocking outside and there was no answer. "I was afraid something had happened to you, so I climbed in through the balcony." He carried me all the way into the ambulance downstairs and held my hand as he climbed in with me. I tried to pull my hand free, but I had no strength. At the hospital I was diagnosed with acute gastritis. I sat in a chair within 4 drip, and he sat beside me. I couldn't move, so I ignored him and leaned back against the chair with my eyes closed. His hand rested against my neck, the cold tips of his fingers made me shiver. "Lean against me, you'll feel better." I frowned and wriggled free. "Don't touch me. How long are you going to make a scene? Let the fact that you broke into my house go, but if you don't want me to call the police, don't touch me. You make me sick." I didn't look at his face and closed my eyes again. My stomach kept aching. I really didn't have the energy to argue with him. Drowsy, I slept a while longer, and only around 7 in the morning did I start to feel better, yet Julian still hadn't left. "I called in for you. You should rest at home today." I didn't reply. I took the medicine and walked out of the hospital, hailed a cab, ignoring Julian trailing behind me. But when I got into the taxi, he got in from the other side. "Let's go home together, it's on the way anyway." There was a hint of placation in his tone. I stayed silent. Back at my building, he still followed behind me. Before I opened the door, I turned back, weary, and said, "Julian, even if this kind of thing happens again, don't show up in front of me. I don't want to see you. Is it just because I'm with Clara that you hate me so much? What did Clara ever do to offend you? Or is it me who offended you? I didn't push you on purpose yesterday. I was scared for Clara, she's not like the rest of us, even a small injury could be fatal for her. I was just too anxious. If you're upset about this, I apologize." I finally realized that Julian had been avoiding a certain issue the whole time, trying to step over it and keep being friends with me. He's got quite the nerve. So I fixed my gaze on his eyes and asked, "Do you like me?" Julian dropped his eyes, clearly reluctant to answer. "Julian, do you like me?" I persisted stubbornly. "I don't love you, but I can't do without you. I don't want to lose you as a friend. Mia, can't we always just be friends? Do you have to force me to choose? Do you really expect that being friends with you means I can never be with anyone else?" He looked at me accusingly, as if I had done something outrageous. "Julian, you can live without being pathetic. You ignored my feelings before and that was one thing, but now I don't like you anymore, and I don't want to be friends with you anymore. It has nothing to do with Clara, nothing to do with anyone, it's my choice. I don't want to see you again. I never told you to choose, you've been the one forcing it. Even if you stayed single forever, things would never be the same between us. Am I being clear enough?" "Why?" "Because you don't deserve it." After I got home, I locked the balcony door. After taking my medicine, I lay drowsy on the bed and noticed someone standing in the corner outside the balcony, a long shadow of a person stretching on the ground. I realized that before my rebirth, I couldn't understand Julian. Even after being reborn, I still couldn't comprehend him. How could he be afraid of losing me? When in the last life he jumped off a building to die for someone else, hadn't he already completely abandoned me? Wasn't losing me an irreversible choice he made? So why does it now seem as if I'm the one who's cruel? 100 days before the college entrance exam countdown, the school celebrated its anniversary. At the evening gala, Clara and Julian played a four-hand piano duet, performing A Secret That Cannot Be Told. The students below were all jeering. I remembered the recording Julian had left on the tape. In the second year of high school, he was still an unrepentant school bully. Once, after getting into a fight off campus, he was rescued by Clara as she passed by and she accidentally got hurt. On the way to the hospital, he held bleeding Clara like a fragile piece of porcelain. That was the beginning of his secret crush. A boy's love arrived irrationally and with overwhelming force. Clara had always been the good girl in class, someone like him felt insecure and thought he didn't deserve her, so he stopped pretending, began to study seriously, and no longer caused trouble. When I first heard the tape I shook with anger, but now my heart is calm. After the college entrance exam I chose a university in the South, a choice completely opposite to the last life. Barring the unexpected, Julian and I will never meet again in this life. I hadn't planned to attend the last class reunion, but Sophie pushed me into going so I had no choice. The teacher also turned a blind eye to the students drinking. Julian and Clara sat opposite me. Sophie sat beside me, she whispered in my ear, "Did you know Julian and Clara applied to the same university?" I didn't know, and I don't care. At first I thought you were pretending you swallowed your tooth, that you were faking it, didn't expect you truly didn't care. Then again, once you get to university, there'll be all sorts of handsome guys. I clinked glasses with her. If there aren't any, it's fine too, a bright future is even better. With the toasts during the banquet I inevitably drank a few more cups, and later my stomach started to feel queasy. I used the excuse of going to the restroom to be sick, planning to leave early. As I stepped out of the restroom, I saw Julian standing by the window in the hotel corridor, smoking. He looked up, his gaze deep as he watched me. "Mia, come here." I gave a soft laugh, he might as well be called a dog. Comes when called, gone with a flick. I waved him off and walked toward the elevator at the other end, heading downstairs. When I reached the hotel entrance, Julian came running out from behind. He reeked of tobacco. I tried to dodge, but he pressed in tight. "Why go so far for university? Didn't we agree to aim for the same school?" The summer evening breeze passed over us and I squinted contentedly. "Because I want to. Besides, I'll go wherever I please, that's my freedom." "It's none of your business." Then a long silence followed. I opened my eyes, looked at Julian's unhappy face, and smiled at him. "We've been enemies for 6 months, haven't you gotten used to it yet?" "Julian, your withdrawal's taking a while." He was momentarily stunned, then said, "No." The taxi I hailed arrived and I didn't press further. Before getting in, I called out toward him, "Julian, we've been together since we were children. You're just not used to it yet, but sooner or later we'll part. In the future we'll each have our own careers, our own families, and we'll slowly lose contact. Sooner or later we'll fade out of each other's lives. You'll eventually get used to a future without me. Julian, goodbye." Once in the cab, I closed my eyes and leaned against the seat. The driver suddenly said, "That young man was chasing after the car back there, should I stop?" No. I wouldn't stop for him. I have my own life, my own regrets. The next morning I boarded the high-speed train heading south. Before leaving, I snapped my SIM card in half and put a new one in my phone, keeping only Sophie's contact. In my previous life she begged me countless times to leave Julian, and I drifted away from her. This time, I won't let myself be blinded by lust and lose my best friend. That year, something big shook the academic world. A professor at a university in Beijing uncovered an academic fraud. 16 years earlier, a foreign study that had laid the foundation for understanding a certain hereditary disease was proven to be fabricated. This is also why, in my previous life, our experiment ultimately ended in failure and became a lifelong regret for me. When I discovered this, my mindset completely collapsed. It meant that for 5 years we had been spending huge sums of money and vast amounts of effort on pointless work, our achievements were false, and we hadn't saved a single patient. Julian went out in glory, dead, while all the blame and rotten consequences were borne by the ones of us who remained alive. After Julian's betrayal, I suffered a fatal blow to my career and my mind utterly fell apart. I developed severe depression. I thought about starting over, but I didn't survive the electroconvulsive therapy. On the first day after being reborn, I immediately told that year's professor about it. Fortunately, in the spirit of pursuing truth, he genuinely began researching that paper, ran countless experiments, and finally demonstrated the truth, both despair and a new hope. This time, we hoped, we could save countless Claras. Not for Julian, but for every single patient. 7 years later, before I finished graduate school, I received news of Sophie's wedding. When I set out, the city I was in was struck by an earthquake. When the quake hit, Julian climbed over from the balcony on the other side into mine and burst in, just like in our youth, holding me tight. He said, "Mia, I love you." We didn't have time to get out. Later, we were buried beneath the rubble. In the dark, he held me in his arms and spoke at length. He said, "I thought you would always stay by my side. I thought that no matter how excessive my actions, no matter how awful I was, you wouldn't leave me. But you left so suddenly, you tossed away the scarf I gave you, threw away everything connected to me, abandoned me. Mia, I regret it. I can't lose you. I don't want anything else, I only want you. But I didn't dare face you. I was afraid of hearing you say those words rejecting me. I was terrified that you truly didn't love me anymore. I couldn't confront you, so after graduation I secretly came here, secretly lived next door to you, hiding from you. Mia, I miss you so much. If it weren't for this earthquake, I wouldn't have had the courage to see you. I never want to lose you again." He said, "I like you." How ridiculous. Later, when we were rescued, he was still holding my hand tight. Julian hurt a leg to protect me. I decided to forgive him. In my past life he deceived me, in this life he made it up to me. I left before he was discharged. Sophie postponed her wedding for me. After attending her ceremony I returned to the old home I hadn't visited in 7 years. I found that the cactus on the balcony was still alive and had even bloomed little yellow flowers. "Julian, why are you doing this again?" I waited at home for 2 days and got a disheveled Julian, his eyes streaked with red, limping as he walked. With reddened eyes he asked me, "Do you really not want me anymore?" I held out the ring on the ring finger of my left hand. "Julian, I registered my marriage in the 2nd year of my master's program, I just didn't tell anyone because I was too busy, and we never held a wedding." "You're lying to me." Julian, you've always been the one lying to me. I never lied to you. But I've never seen you bring anyone home. I sighed. Because he studied abroad, we don't see each other often. This past year, I've been the one visiting him overseas. Julian looked desolate. He said, I was wrong, I really was wrong, I regret it. The one I like is you, it has always been you, I just didn't know it myself. I promise I will never lose you again. I only want you. Mia, please, don't leave me, you're all I have. He sank to his knees and wrapped his arms around my waist, I could feel his tears. It's too late. He was despicable, cowardly, and greedily timid, bound to be denied. Did you, also reincarnate? Is that why you won't forgive me? He asked me, his voice hoarse. I had understood it long ago, back when he confessed to Clara at 18, Julian had been reborn too. So he had hurried to make up for the regrets of his last life. I chose to let him do so. But if he chose Clara, why was he regretting it? Why was he always filled with regret? No matter what choice he made, he was never satisfied. It was like this in his last life, and it's like this in this one too. Julian was truly too greedy. Julian, I should go. He's still waiting for me downstairs. I slowly pushed Julian away, leaving him alone in the darkness. You know, without you, I would die. Julian, your life is yours. No one else is responsible for it but you. So don't try to morally blackmail me. Even if you really choose to die, I won't be upset anymore. I've already shed the tears I should have for you. I don't owe you anything, never did. You don't owe me either. We've long been even, let each other go, and let yourself go too. When I got downstairs, Alex was standing by the car waiting for me. Finished talking? I nodded. He walked over and wrapped me tightly in his arms, his whole body trembling. I said, My Alex, are you really that lacking in confidence? You weren't like this when you were courting me. Alex whispered in my ear. If an earthquake were to happen, I wish it were me by your side. It's okay. It matters. I don't want you to be alone. I've already applied for early graduation, I won't leave again this time, Mia. Let's have our wedding, whatever you do, I'll support you, take care of you, love you. All right. I kissed my lover's cheek. I'll support you too, take care of you, love you. I always thought my meeting with Alex was a coincidence. It wasn't until many years after we were married that he told me the truth. The day it snowed, the day he met me, was no accident. One day, he had a dream. In the dream he was Julian's psychiatrist, and from Julian's mouth he learned of my existence. Every time he accompanied Julian to his appointments, he wanted to tell me the truth, but because of medical ethics he ultimately chose to remain silent. Later, as he pieced together an image of me from what Julian said, he grew increasingly interested in me and, before he knew it, had fallen in love. But before he could confess, I died from electroshock therapy. After I died, he attended my funeral as a stranger. When he woke from the dream, he couldn't shake it. He found me by following the memory from that dream. On that snowy day, he held an umbrella for me. Later, after graduating from university, he chose to enroll in the psychology graduate program at our school and began to pursue me, then a junior. He had planned to give up studying abroad, but I wouldn't allow it. He completed his postdoctoral studies overseas and returned home, and we never separated again. I once asked him if he had considered that it might have been only a dream, all false, what if he couldn't find me? He said, if I didn't go look for you, I think I'd regret it for the rest of my life. Maybe others would call him mad, but I knew he truly had regretted for a lifetime. Alex, I won't let you regret anymore. At 29 I received a world-class prize in physiological medicine, our team succeeded in cracking a genetic disease. After that I never heard any news about Julian again. On the day we sold the old house, Alex came with me to clear out the clutter. He found an old cassette tape in a drawer, with summer written on it. Alex asked me, what is this? I don't remember, I said. Probably something unimportant. He seemed to understand something all of a sudden, then asked me cautiously, "Can I throw it away?" Of course.